The morning of January 5, 1943, found Lieutenant Russell Red Cochrane standing watch at Mount 52 aboard the USS Helena, anchored off Guadalcanal. His hands gripped the firing controls with practiced steadiness as his eyes tracked a Japanese Val dive bomber cutting through scattered moonlight, descending toward the American cruiser line with deadly intent. The aircraft was closing fast, and Cochrane's finger hovered near the trigger mechanism, waiting for the moment that would change everything. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the ammunition being fed into his 5-inch gun represented technology so classified that even he, the man responsible for aiming and firing it, had been kept largely in the dark about what it could actually do. The command came through his headphones sharp and clear: "Commence firing." The gun roared to life, and a shell screamed skyward at 2,600 feet per second, carrying within its metal casing something revolutionary. Inside that projectile, a miniaturized radar set no bigger than a light bulb had begun its invisible work, transmitting radio waves at 180 megahertz, searching for the returning echo that would seal the bomber's fate. 70 feet. That was the critical distance. When the returning signal strength told the fuse that the target had drawn within 70 feet of detonation, the decision was made in an instant. The shell detonated 2,100 yards from the Helena, and the Val disintegrated into burning fragments. The bomb never touched the aircraft. The proximity fuse had done its job perfectly. Cochrane had achieved history that morning without fully understanding it, the first verified combat kill using a proximity fuse, though that achievement would remain buried in classified files for another 2 years. The VT fuse, as it was formally designated to disguise its true nature as variable time technology, would reshape naval warfare in ways neither Cochrane nor the Japanese pilot could have anticipated. By the time the war ended, this combination of radar and explosives would destroy thousands of kamikaze aircraft, transforming Japan's weapon of desperation into something predictably and systematically defeated. The numbers that would determine nations were being written in vacuum tubes and radio waves. Mathematics of survival encoded in miniaturized electronics. Within 24 months, proximity fuses would accomplish what courage and traditional weapons could not achieve: the systematic destruction of an enemy willing to embrace death itself. The kamikaze threat didn't emerge from strategy or honor. It emerged from mathematics. Japan's war had become an equation with no favorable answer. By October of 1944, after the catastrophic losses at the Philippine Sea, where American forces destroyed 645 Japanese aircraft while losing only 123, conventional aerial attacks had become exercises in futility. The numbers no longer permitted hope through traditional methods. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi stood before the staff at Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines, facing arithmetic that offered only one possible solution: fewer than 100 operational aircraft against an American invasion fleet exceeding 700 ships. On October 19, 1944, he presented his answer to the officers assembled from the 201st Air Group. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi recorded exactly what Onishi said that day, words that would echo through the remainder of the war. "The salvation of our country can only come from spirited young men, willing to sacrifice their lives by body-crashing enemy carriers." The logic possessed a terrible clarity. Conventional bombing achieved hit rates below 10% against warships that maneuvered to evade attack. A piloted aircraft, guided by a conscious man, right until the moment of impact, could theoretically achieve hit rates approaching 50%. One pilot, one aircraft, potentially one ship destroyed. In Japan's calculations of desperation, this equation held the only promise available. The first organized kamikaze attack came on October 25, 1944. Lieutenant Yukio Seki led 5 Zero fighters of the Shimpu Special Attack Unit against American escort carriers positioned off Samar. Each aircraft carried a bomb weighing 250 kilograms. Each pilot carried poems written for his family and carried photographs of Emperor Hirohito pressed against his chest. What months of conventional attacks had failed to accomplish, they achieved in minutes. Direct hits. American carriers struck by aircraft flown by men determined to transform themselves into weapons. USS Santee, took a kamikaze strike that killed 16 sailors. USS Suwannee was hit moments later. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's leading ace with 34 aerial victories to his name, recorded his observations in his action report with a tone that mixed recognition with alarm. This is a form of attack that is impossible to stop completely. No amount of pilot skill guarantees interception of every attacker. We are facing an enemy who has weaponized death itself, and we have no adequate defense. Before proximity fuses became widespread throughout the fleet, naval anti-aircraft defense depended on 3 separate weapon systems, each carrying critical vulnerabilities that kamikaze tactics ruthlessly exploited. The 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns established the outer defensive perimeter, engaging targets between 10,000 and 18,000 yards away. These guns fired shells equipped with mechanical time fuses that required manual setting by hand before loading into the gun. Fire control officers relied on the Mach 37 gun fire control system, essentially an analog computer designed to calculate where an aircraft would be when the shell arrived. Against a conventional bomber maintaining steady altitude and flying at approximately 200 miles per hour, the system performed adequately. Against a kamikaze moving at 400 miles per hour in a terminal dive and constantly maneuvering to throw off the firing solution, it became nearly useless. Gunner's mate First Class James Morrison aboard USS Enterprise described what that frustration felt like in the moment. "We'd calculate for 4.5 seconds, expecting the plane at 8,000 feet, but the kamikaze would dive, climb, slip sideways, anything to break our solution. By the time our shell reached the calculated point and exploded, the plane was hundreds of feet away, untouched. We were fighting geometry with arithmetic, and the arithmetic was losing." The 40mm Bofors guns provided intermediate defense, operating in the band between 4,000 and 6,000 yards. These fired shells that required direct contact to explode, demanding that gunners achieve hits on targets presenting minimal profile. A diving kamikaze offered less than 80 square feet of target area. Gunners had to achieve direct hits on aircraft moving at 400 to 500 miles per hour. The statistics were grim. Single-round hit probability measured below 0.3%, meaning most rounds passed harmlessly through empty sky. Chief Petty Officer Harold Stassen commanded a quad 40mm mount aboard USS Hornet. After the war, he testified to what that meant in practice. "We'd fire 480 rounds per minute, traces everywhere, the sky filled with our fire, and watch the kamikaze fly straight through it. Even when we hit them, unless we destroyed the engine or killed the pilot instantly, momentum carried them into the ship. The physics didn't care about our courage. The 20mm Oerlikon cannons formed the final defensive line at 2,000 yards and closer. By the time a kamikaze entered their range, impact was typically 5 seconds away, perhaps less. These weapons fired shells so small that multiple hits were required to achieve structural destruction significant enough to alter the aircraft's trajectory toward the ship." Seaman First Class Robert Baker served as an Oerlikon gunner aboard USS Missouri. He recalled the specific terror of those final moments. At 2,000 yards, you had maybe 4 seconds. Your mind went blank. You just held the trigger and prayed. Even if you shredded the wings, the fuselage kept coming. Metal and momentum don't care about firepower. The proximity fuse didn't originate with kamikaze. Its necessity emerged from an earlier war, from German bombers attacking London during the 1940 Blitz. British anti-aircraft batteries faced mathematics that couldn't sustain the war effort. An average of 18,500 shells to destroy one bomber. The numbers were impossible. Shells had to be set for specific altitudes before firing, but bombers constantly changed height to evade. A shell detonating 100 feet away inflicted no damage. One exploding within 30 feet was lethal. The margin between success and failure was invisible and infinitesimal. In September of 1940, Sir Henry Tizard arrived in Washington carrying Britain's most precious military secrets, enclosed in a black metal deed box. He offered them freely to the United States in exchange for American production capacity. Among those secrets was a concept for miniaturized radar that could fit inside an artillery shell. The assignment went to Section T of the National Defense Research Committee, headed by Dr. Merle Tuvet. at what would become Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. The challenges appeared to border on impossible. Create a device smaller than a coffee cup, yet sturdy enough to survive 20,000 times the force of gravity when fired from a gun, sophisticated enough to distinguish aircraft from ground clutter, and cheap enough to manufacture by the millions. The barriers seemed insurmountable. The breakthrough came from physicist James Van Allen, who would later discover the radiation belt surrounding Earth. Van Allen proposed using hearing aid vacuum tubes, the smallest available at the time, which might potentially survive the massive acceleration of gunfire. These tubes, designed for deaf patients' earpieces, would somehow have to function after experiencing forces that would crush conventional electronics. It seemed improbable. It seemed impossible. It worked. By December of 1942, the team had created a working prototype. The Mark 32 fuse contained 5 vacuum tubes, a battery activated by the setback of firing, an oscillator generating radio waves at 180 MHz, and a therotron switch designed to trigger detonation when the returning signal strength indicated the target had entered lethal radius. The entire device measured 3 inches in length and weighed 11 ounces. The first combat test had happened with USS Helena on January 5, 1943, but widespread deployment across the Pacific awaited resolution of critical security concerns. Navy leadership feared the technology might be captured and reverse-engineered if used over land. By October of 1944, as kamikaze attacks began in earnest, the United States had manufactured over 1 million proximity fuses, each costing $18 to produce, expensive compared to conventional fuses, but insignificant compared to the value of the ships they would protect. Production facilities in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Bridgeport operated around the clock manufacturing 40,000 fuses daily. Most of this work was performed by female workers who had no knowledge of what they were assembling, no understanding of the technology they were helping to create. The completed fuses arrived at Pacific Fleet bases in wooden crates marked "Special Ammunition, Handle with Care." Security remained so tightly controlled that most gunnery officers received only basic operating instructions without being told how the technology actually functioned. The shells appeared identical to conventional ammunition with a single exception, a small plastic nose cone protecting the radio antenna. Captain Willis Lee commanded Battleship Division 7 and received the first major shipment of proximity-fused 5-inch shells in November of 1944. His gunnery officer, Commander Edwin Hooper, recalled the initial briefing. "They told us these shells would triple our effectiveness against aircraft," he said. "We thought it was propaganda until we saw them work." The evidence proved undeniable. The proximity fuses operated on elegant principles of physics. As the shell approached an aircraft, transmitted radio waves would reflect back with increasing strength. When the return signal indicated the target was within lethal radius, typically 70 feet for a 5-inch shell, detonation occurred. The explosion created a sphere of steel fragments expanding at supersonic speed, each fragment capable of piercing aircraft aluminum at considerable distance. The truly revolutionary aspect was discrimination capability. Rain, clouds, and chaff didn't provide sufficient radar return for triggering detonation. Ground return was filtered out by Doppler shift, the same phenomenon that changes the pitch of a train whistle as it passes. Only the rapid closure rate of an aircraft created the precise conditions necessary for the fuse to function. The invasion of Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, became the proximity fuse's supreme test against massed kamikaze assaults. The Japanese launched the Kikusui operations, floating chrysanthemums, 10 massive waves totaling approximately 1,900 kamikaze sorties across 3 months. For the first time, the majority of American ships carried proximity-fused ammunition for all calibers, from 5-inch guns down to 40mm weapons. The first Kikusui attack came on April 6, 1945, coinciding with Operation Tengo, the battleship Yamato's final sortie. Kikusui I involved 355 kamikaze aircraft and 344 conventional fighters. At 1,500 hours, radar screens aboard USS El Dorado displayed what operators called a snowstorm. So many aircraft that individual returns merged into a solid mass of light. Fire Controlman Second Class Eugene Hardy aboard destroyer USS Newcomb described the action as it unfolded. "They came in waves one after another," he said. "Our 5 inches opened up at 12,000 yards. We could see black puffs way out there and planes falling. Not diving smoothly, falling broken. The proximity fuses were turning near misses into kills." USS Lafay's ordeal on April 16th provided the most dramatic demonstration of what the new technology could accomplish. At Radar Picket Station Number 1, the destroyer faced 22 kamikaze aircraft within 80 minutes. Her crew fired 637 rounds of proximity-fused 5-inch ammunition. Despite being struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs, Lafay survived. Her guns destroyed at least 9 attackers. Survivors called the effect a wall of steel surrounding the ship, impenetrable and absolute. Commander Frederick Beckton, Lafay's captain, reported his observations without exaggeration. "The proximity fuses saved us," he wrote. "We'd see a kamikaze boring in, our guns would fire, and the plane would disappear, not shot down, but disintegrated. The fuses turned our defensive fire from probability into certainty." Statistics gathered from Okinawa revealed the magnitude of transformation. Ships equipped with proximity fuses destroyed kamikaze aircraft at rates 7 times higher than those using conventional ammunition. The difference translated directly into lives preserved and ships saved. Japanese pilots quickly recognized that something fundamental had changed in American anti-aircraft capabilities, though they never understood the nature of what they faced. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Minobe, who flew escort for kamikaze missions, testified after the war about the growing concern among Japanese pilots. Beginning in late 1944, American anti-aircraft fire became supernatural, he explained. Planes would explode without being hit. Our pilots reported that Americans had deployed invisible wires or aerial mines suspended in the sky to catch us. Captured Japanese documents revealed the extent of confusion spreading through the Air Force. A tactical bulletin from the 201st Air Group, dated December 1944, stated plainly, "Enemy anti-aircraft effectiveness has increased dramatically. Shells appear to detonate by proximity rather than contact. Recommend irregular flight paths and extreme diving angles." The Japanese developed various theories to explain what they were encountering. Magnetic fuses attracted to engines, infrared sensors detecting engine heat. Even psychics who could detonate shells through mental force alone. The true answer remained invisible, protected by security so strict that even the men firing the guns didn't fully understand the revolution happening in their hands. They did everything they could think of. Engines got wrapped and protected. Degaussing coils went into the aircraft. Wooden planes entered service. Nothing worked against radar-guided fuses. When Ensign Toshio Yoshitake's damaged plane went down and he was captured, he told his interrogators the truth. They had been taught that American gunners lacked proper training, that the Americans just threw enormous volumes of ammunition at the sky and hoped for hits. But something had changed. The shells seemed to know exactly where to find them. The explosions came from everywhere. Walls of metal surrounded the aircraft, closing in from all angles. Flying through American anti-aircraft fire felt like flying through a storm of steel. What the proximity fuse represented was something the Japanese hadn't anticipated, an extraordinary achievement in miniaturization and mass production that would change naval warfare forever. The Mark 53 fuse, which became the standard model by 1945, packed 134 individual electronic components into a device no bigger than a coffee can. This tiny package had to survive forces 20,000 times stronger than gravity when the gun fired it. It had to spin at 30,000 rotations per minute while airborne. It needed to function in temperatures ranging from 40 degrees below zero to 140 degrees above. Creating this required entirely new manufacturing approaches. The workers who built these fuses used jewelers' magnifying glasses just to see what they were doing. Soldiers soldered connections so small they were barely visible to the naked eye. Every 500th fuse got fired at actual test ranges to verify it worked correctly. In the early days, more than 6 out of every 10 fuses failed inspection. By war's end, that rejection rate had dropped below 8%. The battery inside was itself a marvel of engineering. A tiny glass ampule contained an electrolyte that would shatter when the gun fired, activating a wet cell that provided power for about 22 seconds of flight time. This meant the fuses could sit in ammunition magazines for months or years without the batteries degrading. Western Electric developed completely new winding techniques for the vacuum tubes inside. Special microscopic springs held the tube elements in place, allowing them to flex and bend under intense acceleration without breaking. These modifications meant tubes designed for hearing aids could withstand forces that would destroy standard vacuum tubes. Proximity fuses didn't just improve tactics, they fundamentally transformed how naval anti-aircraft defense worked. Before they existed, ships fought by throwing up curtains of shells, enormous barrages designed to create walls of exploding metal in the hope that attacking aircraft would fly through them. It was wasteful and uncertain. Commander Joseph Callahan, the tactical officer for Task Force 58, explained the old way. With time-fused shells, they tried hitting a specific point in space at a specific time, something nearly impossible when the targets were moving and maneuvering. With proximity fuses, they only needed to get reasonably close. The fuse handled everything else. This changed how ships planned their defense. Instead of concentrating massive volleys on single targets, they could spread their fire across multiple attackers, using smaller, coordinated salvos. A destroyer that previously needed 50 rounds to have a reasonable chance of hitting one aircraft could now engage 3 different aircraft with that same ammunition supply. For the first time, effective night defense became possible. Before proximity fuses, darkness made range estimation impossible. Gunners simply couldn't set time fuses accurately without being able to see their targets. Proximity fuses eliminated that problem entirely. The shells determined their own detonation point, regardless of light conditions. Lieutenant Commander Roger Bond, the gunnery officer aboard USS Enterprise, remembered the nightmare of kamikaze attacks at night. They would fire thousands and thousands of rounds into the darkness, shooting blind and hoping something connected. With proximity fuses, their night effectiveness jumped from barely 10% to over 70%. The Japanese soon realized that night attacks had become suicide. By mid-1945, they stopped trying. By the time the war ended, American factories had manufactured more than 22 million proximity fuses. That equaled roughly 1 fuse for every 6 people living in Japan. The program employed workers across 87 different companies, operating 110 separate facilities. Security at these plants rivaled what they had for the Manhattan Project. The Crossley Corporation plant in Cincinnati became the largest, producing 16,500 units every single day when running at peak capacity. The security there was extraordinary. Workers passed through guarded gates where they surrendered personal belongings. They worked in sealed rooms with no windows. Every component they handled had only code numbers, no descriptions. Nobody knew what they were really building. Quality control reached levels that had never been attempted before in any mass production effort. Every 1,000th fuse got test-fired at Aberdeen Proving Ground. If even one failed to detonate within the required range, the entire batch, 500 fuses, got rejected and destroyed. This extremely strict testing pushed combat reliability above 95%. The program consumed strategic materials at astonishing rates. Each fuse needed tiny amounts of silver, gold, and platinum for the electrical contacts. By 1945, the proximity fuse program used more silver in a single month than the entire American jewelry industry had used annually before the war. Both sides understood the proximity fuse was crucial, which sparked intense intelligence warfare. The Germans had captured examples used against V-1 flying bombs over England and desperately tried creating countermeasures. The Japanese lacked captured examples, so they attempted to reconstruct the technology from observations of combat effects and shell fragments they recovered. American intelligence went to extreme lengths protecting the secret. Proximity fuses got used only over water until late in 1944. When USS Drexler sank at Okinawa, carrying magazines full of proximity-fused ammunition, the Navy seriously considered the dangerous operation of demolishing the wreck to prevent the Japanese from salvaging it. Commander Joseph Roquefort, head of Pacific Fleet Intelligence, coordinated elaborate deception campaigns. False information got leaked to enemy agents, suggesting the improved results came from better training and better optical gun sights. Captured German spies got fed deliberate misinformation about magnetic anomaly fuses, supposedly detecting distortions in Earth's magnetic field. The Japanese never managed to get their hands on an intact proximity fuse during the entire war. Their best intelligence came from interrogating captured B-29 crew members who had very limited knowledge. This sent Japanese scientists down futile paths, developing radio-guided shells instead. The U.S. Navy's Operational Research Group spent all of 1945 analyzing how well proximity fuses actually worked. Their findings, kept classified until 1958, showed the real impact these weapons had delivered. Before proximity fuses became widespread, October 1944 through January 1945, kamikaze aircraft managed to hit their targets nearly 29% of the time, counting both direct strikes and damaging near misses. Ships needed an average of 312 rounds fired to destroy a single aircraft. Destroyer picket ships suffered one sunk or severely damaged for roughly every 15 kamikaze attacks. Once proximity-fused ammunition became the standard from February through August of 1945, hit rates plummeted below 10%. Ships now averaged 89 rounds per aircraft destroyed, a 71% improvement in ammunition efficiency. Destroyer losses dropped to one ship lost or severely damaged for every 47 kamikaze sorties, even though the Japanese started using more aggressive tactics. The analysis revealed important details about how effective the fuses really were. Proximity fuses worked best against the steep diving attacks that kamikaze preferred, achieving success rates above 85% when aircraft dove steeper than 45 degrees. Against low-level approaches, effectiveness dropped somewhat, but remained far superior to conventional ammunition. Captain Willis Lee filed an action report in April 1945 that provided specific examples. On April 16th, his force encountered 43 attacking aircraft. Proximity-fused 5-inch ammunition scored 31 confirmed kills at ranges between 4,000 and 9,000 yards. Conventional ammunition fired at the same time achieved only 3 kills, despite using 40% more shells. Not every ship mastered proximity-fused combat tactics right away. The technology required new training, new tactics, and new maintenance procedures. USS Newcomb's experience showed how the learning process played out. Initially, the destroyer's crew set their radar-controlled guns to fire continuously at maximum rate. This created electromagnetic interference between multiple proximity fuses, which actually reduced effectiveness. On April 6, 1945, 5 kamikaze got through their defenses and caused severe damage. Lieutenant Commander Irving McPherson, the gunnery officer, later explained what went wrong. They fired so many proximity fuses simultaneously that they interfered with each other. Radio waves from multiple shells created false return signals. The solution was learning to coordinate fire using controlled bursts instead of continuous streams. The Navy rapidly developed new procedures. Ships designated specific gun mounts to use proximity-fused ammunition, while other mounts used conventional shells. Fire control teams developed pulse patterns, rhythmic firing sequences that minimized interference while maintaining coverage. Maintenance turned out to be equally important. The delicate electronics needed protection from humidity, salt spray, and extreme temperatures. Ships operating in tropical waters discovered that fuses stored in uncooled ammunition magazines often failed. The solution involved installing dehumidifiers and temperature control systems in the ammunition storage spaces. The program's overall scale was staggering. Manufacturing produced 22,773,481 fuses between January 1943 and August 1945. 110 production facilities spread across 26 states. Peak production reached 40,000 anti-aircraft fuses daily. The entire program cost $1.2 billion in 1940s money. The material consumption was voracious: 12 tons of silver every month, 800 pounds of gold every month, 15,000 miles of wire daily, and 140 million vacuum tubes total. The quality achievements were remarkable: 95.3% combat reliability, only a third of 1% premature detonation rate, and 99.7% storage stability after a year. Japanese military records captured after surrender revealed the psychological devastation proximity fuses inflicted on kamikaze units. The 721st Naval Air Group's war diary, recovered from Kanoya Air Base, showed increasingly desperate entries through 1945. In January, pilots reported that enemy anti-aircraft fire had improved noticeably, with shells detonating by proximity rather than timers. They recommended using minimum altitude approaches until the final attack run. By March, losses before reaching attack position exceeded 60%. Enemy shells created an impenetrable barrier around high-value targets. Morale was declining as pilots realized they might die without even reaching their targets. By May, pilots described flying into solid walls of steel, finding conventional evasive maneuvers completely ineffective. They requested permission to conduct night attacks exclusively. By July, the daily Sake ration had increased. Many volunteers expressed preference for conventional missions despite the lower honor they brought. Pilots reported that enemy fire seemed guided by supernatural forces. Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa survived multiple kamikaze missions due to mechanical failures and testified after the war. They had been taught to expect a glorious death for the emperor. Instead, they watched comrades explode far from their targets, their sacrifice meaningless. It was not battle, but execution. The Mark 53 fuse, standard by 1945, represented an engineering achievement of extraordinary sophistication. The physical dimensions were compact, 3.2 inches long, 2.1 inches in diameter, weighing 11.3 ounces. Inside were 134 individual parts. The electronic systems operated at oscillator frequencies between 180 and 220 MHz, producing 0.4 watts of power. The detection range was adjustable from 15 to 70 feet. Battery life lasted 20 to 30 seconds after activation. The signal processing used 4 stages of amplification. Performance specifications were equally demanding. The fuse had to survive 20,000 G of activation setback and handle 30,000 RPM of spin. It functioned across temperatures from 65 degrees below zero to 165 degrees above zero. It resisted 98% humidity at 140 degrees. It survived 500 G of lateral shock. The operation was elegantly simple, despite the internal complexity. When the gun fired, setback shattered the electrolyte ampule and activated the battery. Centrifugal force from the shell spinning armed the detonator after 0.8 seconds. The oscillator transmitted while the receiver listened for reflected signals. When the reflected signal reached the amplitude, indicating a target within lethal radius, the thyrotron switch discharged the firing capacitor. The entire sequence from detection to detonation took 3/10,000ths of a second. Admiral Richmond Turner, commanding amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion possible. Without proximity fuses, he estimated their losses would have exceeded 150 ships sunk. The invasion might have failed entirely. This technology saved tens of thousands of American lives. Proximity fuses influenced Japanese strategic thinking. Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement mentioned a new and most cruel bomb: atomic weapons. But Japanese military records showed equal concern about conventional defense improvements. An Imperial Navy staff study from July 1945 concluded that enemy anti-aircraft capabilities had advanced to the point where special attack operations no longer achieved favorable exchange ratios. Post-war strategic bombing survey interviews revealed how much the proximity fuse affected Japanese strategy. Admiral Somu Toyota, Chief of Naval General Staff, stated they had calculated 500 special attack aircraft could destroy 100 American ships at Okinawa. Due to the enemy's new anti-aircraft weapons, 500 aircraft achieved less than 30 ships seriously damaged. This failure made continuing the strategy mathematically impossible. The economics of the proximity fuse program proved remarkably favorable. The program cost $1.2 billion. It saved more than 200 major warships. Replacing those ships would have cost $8 billion. The lives saved were worth an estimated $40,000 to $60,000 each. Medical and disability costs avoided came to roughly $2 billion. Ammunition efficiency improved by 70%. Magazine space requirements decreased by 60%. Gun crew fatigue reduced by 50%. Engagement time per target dropped by 65%. Each proximity fuse cost $18. The shell cost $15. Combined cost $30. This modest investment paid dividends across every measure of naval effectiveness. A single kamikaze aircraft cost around $15,000 to build. When you did the math on what the Americans were spending to shoot them down, the exchange rate favored Japan by roughly 500 to 1. But by the summer of 1945, everything changed. The proximity fuses became so devastatingly effective that the entire Japanese tactical approach had to be completely rethought from the ground up. Operation Ketsugo represented the Japanese strategy for defending their home islands. They stopped launching kamikaze attacks during daylight hours almost entirely. Instead, they shifted everything to nighttime operations, ultra-low approaches that skimmed just above the waves, and any weather conditions they could exploit. Vice Admiral Motome Ugaki commanded the Special Attack Forces, and on July 24, 1945, he made a revealing entry in his personal diary. "The Americans have developed a defense we cannot penetrate," he wrote. "Our young men die in vain, exploding in empty sky far from targets. We must find new methods or abandon special attacks altogether." Desperation drove the Japanese to develop Operation Tsurugi, a new kind of suicide attack using stripped-down fighters that would fly at wave-top height to slip beneath radar detection. These aircraft would stay below 50 feet for most of their approach, only pulling up in the final seconds before impact. Initial trials suggested real promise, but Japan surrendered before they could implement it on any meaningful scale. Japanese scientists worked with growing urgency on electronic countermeasures. Project Yashima focused on developing jamming transmitters that could disrupt the proximity fuse frequencies. Their laboratory tests showed encouraging results, yet Japan faced an insurmountable problem. They simply lacked the industrial capacity to produce these devices in any significant quantity. Their best prototype weighed 200 pounds and needed its own aircraft to carry it, which completely defeated the entire purpose. The proximity fuse's remarkable success triggered rapid technology sharing among all the Allied forces. British forces deployed ground-based anti-aircraft guns equipped with proximity fuses against the V-1 flying bombs threatening London. After December 1944, they destroyed 79% of the attacks aimed at the city. The Soviet Union received 25,000 proximity fuses through the Lend-Lease program and reported comparable success defending Eastern Front cities from aerial assault. This single invention sparked an explosion of related innovations. By the time the war ended, American scientists had adapted proximity fuses for aerial rockets, naval rockets, artillery shells, mortar rounds, and aerial bombs. Each application demanded unique modifications because the conditions were completely different. Rocket fuses had to handle extremely high velocities. Artillery fuses needed ground return filters to prevent accidental detonation. Bomb fuses required barometric switches to prevent them from going off at high altitude, where they'd be useless. What few people realized was that Germany had independently developed proximity fuses. This fact illustrated a crucial distinction between having a brilliant idea and actually being able to manufacture it. The German design used capacitive sensing, detecting electrical field disturbances caused by nearby aircraft. In many ways, the German approach was actually more elegant, requiring only 23 components compared to the American version's 134. Yet mass production with German methods proved fundamentally impossible. They managed to produce only 8,000 units total before the war ended. America, meanwhile, manufactured 22 million. Dr. Hubert Schaden, the lead German proximity fuse scientist, reflected after the war with clear regret. "We solved the theoretical problem in 1940 before the Americans even began," he noted. But theory without production capacity is merely interesting. The Americans built in one day what took us a month. Statistical analysis reveals the profound impact proximity fuses had on preventing catastrophic casualties during the planned invasion of Japan. Operation Downfall, scheduled for November 1945, anticipated between 5,000 and 10,000 kamikaze aircraft attacking the invasion fleet. Without proximity fuses, loss estimates ran to 400 to 500 ships sunk or severely damaged, with 100,000 naval casualties. The proximity fuse changed everything. Planners recalculated the losses as 100 to 150 ships, with 25,000 casualties. Still horrific, but at least potentially survivable. The atomic bombs eliminated the need to test these grim projections, though what happened at Okinawa suggested even the reduced estimates might have been optimistic. Individual ships told the story of lives preserved. The USS Aaron Ward came under attack by multiple kamikaze on May 3, 1945. Despite taking 3 direct hits, her gunners using proximity-fused ammunition shot down 6 attacking aircraft. Combat analysis later suggested that without those proximity fuses, most of the attacking planes would have found their targets, likely sending the ship to the bottom with heavy loss of life. Gunner's mate Aristides Footrides served aboard a destroyer escort during intense kamikaze attacks. Computer analysis conducted in the 1970s showed something striking. With conventional ammunition, we would have been hit by 14 kamikaze instead of 6, he calculated. No ship survives 14 direct hits from kamikaze. Every single man aboard owed his life to those proximity fuses. Fire Control Officer Lawrence Delowski added his perspective. The proximity fuses gave us hope, he explained. Before, when radar showed 50 bogies incoming, we knew most would get through. After VT fuses appeared, we actually had confidence that technology was on our side. The proximity fuse program advanced entire technological fields by decades. The miniaturization requirements pioneered techniques that later enabled transistor development. The mass production methods anticipated modern electronics manufacturing. Quality control standards established benchmarks still referenced in aerospace today. Dr. James Van Allen reflected in 1980 that the proximity fuse program resembled the Manhattan Project, but for electronics. We compressed 20 years of development into 24 months, he said. Every cell phone, every computer, every piece of modern electronics owes something to the manufacturing techniques we pioneered during this program. The program generated 87 patents, established 12 entirely new manufacturing processes, and trained thousands of workers in precision electronics assembly. After the war, many of these trained workers became the foundation of America's electronics industry. Companies like Texas Instruments, Fairchild Semiconductor, and Intel all traced their origins back to proximity fuse manufacturers. Japan's post-war military history series, published by the Japanese Defense Agency in 1952, offered a revealing analysis. The proximity fuse had fundamentally altered the mathematics of special attack operations, they concluded, rendering them strategically ineffective by March 1945. Captain Riki Hei Inoguchi, a senior kamikaze operations staff officer, wrote in 1958 that the proximity fuse represented far more than a technical improvement. It was a paradigm shift, he explained. It transformed anti-aircraft fire from probability-based to deterministic. Our pilots faced not random death, but systematic destruction. Admiral Takijiro Onishi, who had fathered the entire kamikaze program, committed suicide on August 16, 1945. His final note expressed deep remorse. I apologize to the souls of my brave subordinates and their bereaved families for sending them to deaths that achieved nothing, he wrote in part. Historians believe the proximity fuse's devastating effectiveness contributed significantly to his despair. Throughout 1945, proximity fuses underwent continuous refinement based on actual combat experience. The Mark 58, introduced in May, incorporated lessons learned from Okinawa. It featured improved discrimination circuits that reduced false triggering from clouds by 90%. Variable sensitivity settings allowed adjustment for different target sizes. Enhanced countermeasures defeated Japanese jamming attempts. Battery life extended to 35 seconds. Components became miniaturized, reducing the entire unit's weight to just 9.8 ounces. The Mark 59, which would have been ready when Japan surrendered, would have incorporated micro-alloy vacuum tubes that increased reliability to 99.2%, while cutting costs to just $11 per unit. The proximity fuse program demonstrated American industrial genius at its finest. Factories that had never produced electronics suddenly transformed into precision manufacturers overnight. Zenith Radio's Chicago plant converted from home radios to proximity fuses in just 6 weeks. The program demanded unprecedented cooperation between competitors. RCA, Westinghouse, General Electric, and Sylvania shared patents and manufacturing techniques freely. Trade secrets that companies guarded zealously in peacetime were published in weekly bulletins distributed to every manufacturer. The numbers paint a picture of transformation. 22,773,481 fuses were produced. 5.3 million were fired in combat. They proved 7 times more effective than conventional fuses. Ammunition expenditure dropped by 70%. An estimated 40,000 to 60,000 American lives were saved. 200 major warships and 500 smaller vessels survived attacks that would otherwise have sunk them. Japanese losses directly attributed to proximity fuses included 2,800 aircraft destroyed and over 4,200 pilots killed. Kamikaze effectiveness plummeted from 28.7% to below 10%. Admiral Mark Mitchell, commanding Task Force 58, submitted his final action report on August 20, 1945. The proximity fuse was the decisive technology in defeating Japanese special attack tactics, he wrote. Without it, our losses would have been unsustainable. With it, kamikaze attacks became an exercise in enemy attrition. In the war's final month, Japanese kamikaze units achieved only 2.8% success rates. 97 of every 100 pilots died without reaching their targets. The proximity fuse had transformed the kamikaze from an apparently unstoppable force into a predictably defeated tactic. Captain Joseph Enright, commanding the USS Arcafish, provided an eloquent summary. The proximity fuse didn't just shoot down planes, he observed. It shot down an entire military philosophy. The Japanese believed spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage. The proximity fuse proved that technology properly applied defeats fanaticism. The proximity fuse established principles still governing military technology today. Miniaturization multiplies power. Fitting radar into shells proved that size reduction dramatically multiplies military effectiveness. Every modern smart weapon traces its lineage back to proximity fuses. Production wins wars. Germany's arguably superior design meant nothing without the production capacity to build millions of them. America's ability to manufacture millions of complex devices proved absolutely decisive. Integration beats innovation. The proximity fuse contained no revolutionary components, just existing technologies brilliantly integrated. Modern military doctrine emphasizes system integration over breakthrough innovation. Automation saves lives. Removing human decision-making from split-second combat situations dramatically improves effectiveness. Today's automated defense systems follow the principles established by proximity fuses. The radar proximity fuse stands as World War II's most decisive yet profoundly underappreciated technology. While the atomic bomb ended the war dramatically, proximity fuses had already made invasion of Japan feasible by neutralizing the kamikaze threat. Without them, American casualties might have reached levels making continued war politically impossible. The statistics tell only part of the larger story. Behind every number were young Americans who lived because shells exploded at precisely the right moment, and young Japanese who died without achieving their sacrificial purpose. The proximity fuse transformed the Pacific War's final act from mutual slaughter into technological dominance so complete that further resistance became meaningless. It was more than merely a weapon. It represented American industrial and scientific supremacy made manifest. It declared that no amount of courage, no willingness to die, no spiritual devotion could overcome the material advantages of a fully mobilized democracy. The kamikaze pilots offered their lives. The proximity fuse made that offer irrelevant. Sailors watched kamikaze disintegrate mid-air. Workers assembled components without knowing their purpose. Scientists solved supposedly impossible problems. All were part of democracy's answer to totalitarian fanaticism. That answer, delivered through 22 million proximity fuses, was straightforward. American technology would protect American lives regardless of the price enemies were willing to pay. The proximity fuse destroyed far more than aircraft. It destroyed the fundamental premise of kamikaze warfare, that spiritual determination could overcome material disadvantage. Against American radar, miniaturized and mass-produced, the divine wind dissipated into historical footnote. The rising sun set on Japanese military ambitions, brought down by radio waves and vacuum tubes smaller than a sack cup. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor to prevent American interference in their expansion. They ended the war watching their most dedicated warriors explode harmlessly in empty sky, destroyed by American technology so advanced it seemed supernatural. The proximity fuse transformed their ultimate sacrifice into ultimate futility. It was democracy's perfect weapon against fanaticism, not matching sacrifice for sacrifice, but making sacrifice irrelevant through superior technology. It won through production rather than destruction, innovation rather than emulation, protecting life rather than glorifying death. In that victory lay not just the Pacific War's end, but the template for American military supremacy continuing to this day. The kamikaze came to die. The proximity fuse ensured they died achieving nothing. In that reality lay Imperial Japan's defeat and American democracy's triumph, measured not in courage, but in electronics, not in spirit, but in science, not in death, but in the technology that prevented it.